Jennifer Jenkins, and I'm sitting in my office in Southampton University, where I work in the Centre for Global Englishes. And I've been researching ELF for rather longer than I want to think about, actually. I would say probably about 25 years. And when I started, I was particularly interested in pronunciation because it seemed to me that people's accent were the most obvious thing to them when they were using English in intercultural communication. That's between people from different first languages. The first work I did when I was collecting my data, I was actually an EFL teacher, and I collected it from my own students, a lot of it from my own students. And that resulted in what I called at the time the Lingua Franca core, and I think there's been quite a lot about it on the website. And I found a number of things that seemed to be important for communication among speakers from different first languages. But that led other people to start looking for what we were called at the time features of ELF vocabulary, grammar and so on. And we did that for quite a long time, but then we realised that actually you can't really look at ELF like that. You can't say it's got certain features that we could teach because they don't happen all the time. It's such a very fluid, very flexible, very variable phenomenon because it's so diverse. There are people from hundreds of different first languages, and you never know who you're going to be speaking with, and you never know what kind of English they'll know, what other languages they speak, until you start talking with them. So we moved on to look much more at the kinds of processes that are used in ELF and why people change the way they speak and how they communicate in this sort of online way when they very spontaneously using their English with other people. And we found a lot out, and a lot of publications were produced where we looked at how hybrid ELF is, how people invent different ways of using English, how people change the way they use it, a lot of accommodation. I mean, we always talked about accommodation, adjusting for the benefit of your communication partner, but it became much more important, and this ability to adjust became a really, really important skill. And we talked for a long time about how it's much more important to be able to adjust the way you speak English than to be able to mimic a native speaker of English. Most recently, I've been much more interested myself in multilingualism because although it's been obvious for a lot, from the beginning that actually ELF is a multilingual phenomenon, and we've always described it as a multilingual phenomenon, that the majority of people who use ELF are multilingual. Even native speakers of English like me are also, are not necessarily, we're a very small minority of ELF users. Some of us are multilingual, so we're not all monolingual, but we are a very small minority, so the majority of ELF users are multilingual. And I started to feel that multilingualism had been very much treated as just one aspect of ELF, whereas actually multilingualism is what ELF is. It's multilingual. You can be multilingual without speaking English, without using ELF, but you cannot use ELF without being multilingual. It would be very, very difficult. As I say, there are a very few monolingual ELF users, but I think they find it quite difficult to use ELF effectively. So we're looking at a situation where actually ELF is not just about adjusting the way you use English. That's very, very important, but it's also about being, the way you effectively slip in and out of other languages, and maybe how the other languages very much affect the way you use English. So I'd say that's where I've got to now. And for teachers, I mean, I'm not an English teacher myself, so I hesitate to give any sort of advice to teachers because you're the professionals and you know better than I do. But I think what's really important with English, if you're teaching English to people who are not going to be using it with native English speakers, and I guess that's probably most of your students, flexibility is really, really important. Teaching people that it's much better to have the skill of being able to adjust how you speak so that you speak in a way that the people you're talking to can understand you, and that you train your ears to be able to understand people who speak English in ways you don't speak it, and also to expect people to go into other languages, and maybe you all know Spanish in the group, maybe you might slip into it, and not think about that as being sort of bad. You know, it's somehow bad if you slip into another language. Actually, monolingualism is the world exception, multilingualism is the world norm. And if you're a multilingual ELF user, you are a really effective user of English.